Chapter 1, continuing. House of Sound. I lived with my grandmother near the Blue Stone for about a year. I was fortunate as a young child to be able to spend so much time with her. According to my tradition, when a woman enters the period of her life between the ages of 30 and 70, she carries the energy of descending light, of gifts being brought forth from the heavenly planes. In my grandmother's presence, however, all I was able to feel was the energy of her love. Through her, light descended as warmth on us children. My grandmother was small, probably no more than 5 foot tall. When I was a child, that felt reassuring, for it meant she was never far from my reach. Since she was pleasantly plump, hugs from her were especially warm and comforting. I never tired of gazing in her face. Her eyes were dark and shiny, and when she looked at me, it was with such goodness that I knew she could see all the way into my heart. What I remember most was her smile. She seemed always to be smiling. Her face would light up from somewhere deep inside. For her, life was full of joy, and she had the capacity to tap into pleasure, even while doing the simplest of tasks. My grandmother's house was a simple 2-room structure with 2 windows and a door. The outer walls were lightly rounded and made from adobe, a mixture of mud, straw, and micaceous clay. When the sun shone, the tiny pinpoints of gold, which were everywhere in the micaceous clay, would reflect its rays, giving the whole house a glistening golden quality. Barley has arrived. Inside, the walls were painted with red clay from the ground upwards for about 3 feet, and were whitewashed the rest of the way up to the ceiling. Overhead, the ceiling was constructed from pine poles which had been stripped of their bark. Much of my grandmother's day was spent in the kitchen. The kitchen did not have a stove, so all of the cooking was done on an open fireplace in clay pots. I would watch with delight as she stooped over the fireplace. Her small, round body was just the right size to make the fireplace disappear, and the light of the flames would somehow outline her moving silhouette on the wall. It seemed like magic to me. After cooking, she would set about the other chores. She would sweep the floor with a hand brush of straws harvested from the fields. These brushes were holy because the herb the straw was taken from was sacred. Thus, cleaning the floor and cleaning the house was really a ceremony of beautification, opening the gateways to the upper heavens, to awareness. She managed our lives with tasks geared towards work as worship, as ceremony in our daily lives. As she swept the earthen floor, she would create a small dust storm in which she would periodically disappear. Then, out from the dust, we would see the familiar small plump figure emerge once more. When she was sweeping, we would all try to keep out of her way, because in her path we knew nothing was safe. Dust, she would say, was the principle of transcendence. She would shout to us, "Pay attention," so that we wouldn't miss the voices of our ancestors who were there to help us to be good people. If we missed their voices, we could get lost in the metaphors of life. So we would be swept playfully out the door along with the flying dust, and then she would shout, "Be sure to leave your shoes at the door before you come back in, you little dust beings." Just as soon as the dust settled, we would see our grandmother scurrying down to the river to quickly refresh herself before scurrying back up to the house to continue with the daily chores. She knew we only had such a short time in which to live, and that we should therefore live as solidly as we could, so we could appreciate every moment. In my grandmother's house, we did not have any furniture. It was particularly significant that there was no table, so we would sit on the dirt floor when eating. The floor is important, my grandmother would say. It represents the floor of life where everything comes from. It holds everything. Everything that comes from the floor or the foundation of life. It feeds us. It clothes us. It houses us. She would make reference to the fact that our houses were made from adobe, from earth, and so we were being supported by the soil of the earth, which symbolized the vastness of the inner self. The earth was the flower garden, and we were her little flowers. So, when we ate sitting on the floor, we were in prayer, being fed, and, in turn, we were feeding the being that was feeding us. Our grandmother would feed us from clay dishes, and we would eat with tiny gourds, which we used for spoons. Once we were busy eating our soup with the special gourds, she would take the opportunity to tell us stories. These gourds are made of music, she would tell us, and so all the food you eat comes from beautiful music. You are eating music, so your bodies will make beautiful sacred sounds, sounds which will make your personal songs. The house that we live in is made of sound, and life is a house made of sound, and the people are made from that sound. Since people are made of sound, listening is important. It is through listening that you become a true human, and a true human is a listener who is constantly attuned by working with everything that is happening. To become a true human, one must become conscious of listening and hearing the voice of the great mystery speaking through everything, through the sound of a tree, or the bird flying overhead, or the wind in the room, or someone breathing, or someone talking, or a moment of silence. The activity of sound is what made the people. It is, therefore, simply through listening and using that listening and paying attention that one finds the guidance of the great mystery along the path of life. She used to say that our house was modeled after the first house, created out of the shattering light of our ever-unfolding perceptions. As she spoke, we knew the whole universe was alive, and everything had perception. All of the principal ideas which made the floor and the walls and the doors, or the fresh air, or the sunrises, the noontimes, the sunsets, all were moments in which everything was being perceived by the essence of the great mystery, and the great mystery was being perceived in return. The house of shattering light was a dimension of this perceptual reality which was taking place moment by moment as we expressed ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually. We live in the world of the shattering light. We are simply a moment in eternity. We are but a ringing bell slice of light, and through that slice we can see. We are in touch with that moment mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. However, the ringing slice of light passes quickly, and we are then involved in the next slice of light and the next moment. There again, we see it, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Soon, this slice of light, too, is gone, and we are into the next slice of light, and so it continues. One day, in a shamanic experience, I saw that we were created out of a continuum of rapidly moving light, and I saw that it was timeless in its nature. In the house of shattering light, time has an opportunity to become, and meaning slows down, so we can perceive each moment and participate in it totally. For very soon that slice of light gives way to another. My grandmother taught us that living inside the perceptual reality would keep us in fine attunement because we would be totally aware of what was transpiring moment by moment in our lives. When the stories and the teachings were over for the day, I would sometimes stay sitting on the floor, enjoying the warmth of the fire. The air seemed full of magic. The flames would dance before our eyes, filling the whole room with a soft glow. It was like being in a warm and comforting womb. Time would disappear. Sometimes the light would cast mysterious shadows on the wall. 1,000 stories would come from those forms. The images, often of animals, the familiar forms of the deer, the rabbit, the fox. This is not surprising when one considers that these animals were my playmates and my trusted friends. It was in the world of nature that I felt most secure because I had the quality of love carrying me. By contrast, I felt so displaced at the school I attended. Here the days were intolerably long, and time moved ever so slowly. I could not read until I was 12. It took me that long to discover how to mentally bring the blackboard forward so that my poor eyesight was no longer a hindrance. Until that time, I would escape whenever possible from anything connected with school or books and flee to the safety of the mountain range close to Picurus. Here I could learn from another teacher. Here was the wisdom of Father Sky and the nurturance of Mother Earth. Here my animal friends would share their secrets. I would stay for hours, for days at a time, alone and never lonely. I would run and play, free in the wilderness and the beauty of the world surrounding me. Here was pure being, where my body could drink the early morning crispness and the evening bird songs. It was here I fell more in love with life and grew in awe of the spirit from which all comes. The carrying qualities of beauty began to drink me into their revelations. Teachings from a Medicine Man. In my early years, I had heard stories about my grandfather on my father's side, but I did not know him very well because some of those early years were spent at the Ute Reservation of my mother's people in Colorado. However, when we moved to Picurus, home of my father's people, I was given my first opportunity to know a person who was not just my grandfather, but also a wise man. My father had told me that there would be a time when he would place me in the home of my grandfather. Not much more was said about it until that day came. I remember ceremoniously walking at my father's right side while momentarily hesitating on the holy sites so that I could juice up with their essences. Leading me down the dirt path was not easy for him, so he kept saying, "Come, come, pay attention," as we made our way through the village houses until we came to the house of my grandfather. My grandfather's name was Antonio de Simbola. His Tiwa name was Pel Qui-We. I have brought you this boy so you can teach him how the people descended, then arose as the people, my father said. I knew this was an important rite of passage for me. My grandfather seemed pleased, and his wife, with her arms reaching out almost as far as her warm smile, came forward to welcome me. My father then left, and I lived there for a while. How long I lived there, I don't remember. Time, like so many winters and many summers of passing images, truth, feeding life into my presence. Living with my grandfather was living with the unpredictable. I never knew what he was going to do next. I would get up in the morning in hopes that he had not left the house. I always woke up on the run because I didn't want to miss anything. Wherever he walked and whatever he became involved in seemed to be infused with magic. I remember once I dislocated my knee. My grandfather was 5 miles away and heard me and came home immediately. He then proceeded to place ashes on my knee. It healed instantly. The vitality which resonated from his presence affected everything. It was as though he left tiny whirlwinds of energy in his path, energy for those who followed to pick up. In later years, I remember riding a motorcycle with my brother. We would come up close behind these large semi-trucks so that we would be able to turn off our motor and let the convection carry us along on the highway. Of course, it was dangerous. Had the truck stopped, we would have run right into the back of it. But we thought it was fun. Like my grandfather, I love the unpredictable. But unlike my grandfather, I had much to learn about the difference between the creative edge and the dangerous edge. My grandfather was a very well-rounded person and was held in high esteem by the community. Because he was a medicine man and could speak Spanish as well as Tiwa, he was invited in among the Hispanic people in our community as a spiritual teacher. Much to my delight, my grandfather would take me with him, and I would repeat the Hail Marys and the Our Fathers at the Hispanic people's church. The only problem was that all of the prayers were done kneeling. I would stay kneeling for as long as I could, and then my knees would begin to hurt. I would become fidgety and want to get up, but I knew that I couldn't because my grandfather wouldn't like it. So I suffered in silence. Soon, I discovered a way of overcoming this discomfort. I decided that my knees simply weren't there, and if they weren't there, then they couldn't feel the pain. I would later learn that this is a technique of intercepting pain used in many circles. As I knelt next to my grandfather, trying to ignore the pain, I found that I could pass very quickly into places where I could see angelic beings created by the energy of prayer. I could never hear what it was they were saying, although their mouths were moving constantly, but it was fun to watch them flashing through the walls. It was like enjoying my own movie, one that no one else could see. I wanted so much to share it with them, but I could not because I knew they could not see it. Whenever I closed my eyes, I was able to continue to watch this movie and, at the same time, hear, way in the distance, the murmuring prayers of the people. After a while, I became disorientated. I was no longer able to hear my grandfather. All I was aware of was a brilliant light swirling around the room, a nurturing light, bluish-purple in color, which enveloped me as tenderly as when my father used to hold a lamb. The forms in the room and the people almost seemed secondary to this vision. It was as if the physical world were an afterthought. The real form of life was in the light of the dancing vibration of prayer. During the stay with my grandfather, I began to learn the Tiwa world, the world of the people who, according to the teachings of my grandfathers and my grandmothers, came from sound, from vibration, according to the Tiwa myth maker. According to the Tiwa mythmaker being, in the beginning, vibration wanted to walk, vibration wanted to run, vibration wanted to climb. According to the storyteller, vibration loved to climb, like little boys love to climb. Vibration liked to sit and play, just as little boys like to sit and play. Vibration liked to be grandfathers and grandmothers. Vibration loved little boys and little girls because vibration was babies, and vibration was boys of 8 years old, or girls of 8 years old, or teenage girls and boys. Vibration was made of teenage love already being what it was being, so it could continue. Vibration was 20, and then 25, and then 35, or thereabouts. Then vibration decided it would descend into form and become the living concreteness we call the material form. It was in repeating its form over millions and millions and millions of moments and light years that it was finally embodied, becoming what it had always loved to do the most, and that was vibrating. Vibrating as humans do, and as energy does in the physical world or conceptual world, as the action states of various conscious awarenesses. What this myth was telling us was that if we were to do something long enough and believe in it, we could manifest it. We were the receivers of memory, listening stations of cosmic truths in the here and now, and senders to the future. My grandfather would often take me with him to the kiva. In the summertime, we would even sleep there. One particular summer evening I shall never forget. As usual, my grandfather built a fire in the fireplace, but this time, after he had finished singing a number of the songs and prayer lines on the floor of the chamber, he asked me to lie down beside him and to put my back against his when we went to sleep. He said that there would be some dream time, and there might be some lights or some other phenomenon, and for me not to be afraid because the human back is sacred. He lay down with his body facing the fire. I can remember that he was blocking off most of the heat with his body, so in order to keep warm, I kept snuggling my back close into his. I know now why he had me lie on my side in that posture. My grandfather talked about the transmission of knowledge as one of the ancient practices. He told me that the front part of the body receives information and the back passes it on. That is why we have a front side and a back side of the physical body. With the front, we face situations, we face life, we walk into things, we meet people face on. The front side receives heat from psychic energy, and the back side is the cold, chi side. We are like miniature translators and transformers. We are simply transmitting or broadcasting. We are little broadcasting stations that openly bridge the future while washing all our moments with memory. That is how we come to know things. This energy goes out through the backs of our bodies. These are the tracks that we leave behind, physically as well as philosophically. We leave behind certain works we create, and we leave those works for people who are therefore followers. So when we say people who follow us, it is a literal as well as a philosophical statement of the purpose of life itself. We're simply actors in this life unfolding before us, and as we face life, we leave behind our trail of moments for those who come behind us to resonate to. When I lied down back to back with my grandfather, I saw brilliant flashes of light. Later, I realized that those lights, which were coming on and off and on as I closed my eyes, and perhaps continuing after I went to sleep, those lights were coming out of his body. They were the different powers and ideas that we presently living in all things in the village. They lived within us and in our relationships with other planets and stars. The lights were also the awakening, in and of themselves, the awarenesses which opened our eyes to life and the part we play in it. They held, too, the sense of being in the state of grace, constantly falling into itself, that sense that comes to us in those moments when we feel that we are being carried. Above all, there was a powerful sense of wholeness or holiness in those lights because they were made of a sleeping dark nighttime that was planting lights on its dark fields. As the transference took place, the knowledge was passed from his consciousness to mine. At the time of that experience with my grandfather, Tua wasn't written and is still not written today. I believe that experience translated the sound vibration of the Tua language. That vibration would create in me an awe of life. Due to that moment, I would want to investigate the sounds of different languages, and I would search for the mother tongue. Out of that moment would come a longing and a wanting that created the impetus to write this book based on sound, vibration, language. Through that experience, I came to understand that the earth has always been talking to us, but many of us have lost our sensitivities to sound and to vibration, so we do not hear her. Through sound, she is telling us exactly what is going to happen next, but we haven't been able to hear her because we have lost our sensitivity to work as worship. We have forgotten how to listen to what our efforts have been saying. One of the last teachings of my grandfather was, "Pay attention." I didn't understand what he meant. I know now he was saying that the key to life is sensitivity, and that only through developing the capacity of sensitivity to everything will we hear the real message. Ah, dala pi ah shi were the words my grandfather used. Become the essence of work, the being of listening. If you want to be a true human being, become of work, of listeningness, and you will find the voice of our Mother, Father, Spirit talking.